Hi, this is Derek Murphy from creativeindy.com. In this video series, I'm going to talk about how to write fiction that sells. It's kind of a two-part. I'm also going to talk about how to sell your fiction, but there's a huge difference between writing fiction that sells and selling your fiction. Most authors will finish a novel first, and they'll write what they wanted to write, and they'll then try to sell it. There's a lot of things you can do to market a book, but the number one criteria in whether or not a book is going to be successful is how large the potential readership for that book is. So I could write something, for example, I write young adult fantasy, I write a mermaid romance, and I write a vampire romance. The vampire romance is going to outsell the mermaid romance 10 to 1 because there are 10 times more readers who are searching for and appreciate vampire romance books. So that's kind of, that's out of your control. You can't change the market, but you can decide to write books that more readers will find and appreciate. So that's one thing, that's just keywords, like what genre, what topic you're writing about. But on the other hand, the vast majority of fiction that sells is going to be commercial fiction that has a large audience, and that's generally not literary fiction, generally not contemporary. Those can still sell okay. You could still sell really well for your genre, but you can't make lots of money because those genres are much smaller. And it's harder, like there are certain categories like commercial and literary fiction that give a lot of priority and weight to traditionally published books. So if you're self-publishing, there's a smaller market and more competition, so it's harder to break into those markets. Whereas if you're writing commercial fiction and you're self-publishing, there's a much wider audience and they consume books more quickly. So readers, like young adult readers who read paranormal romance or urban fantasy, they go through books faster. And so it's more likely that you can get your book up on the top of those charts and rank really well and actually sell your book. So in this video series, I'm mostly going to talk about plotting your book. And there's two reasons why plotting is really important. On the one hand, for thousands of years, readers or humans have been trained to respond emotionally to a certain kind of story. There are certain story elements that if you put them together in the right order and put them in about the right places, they're going to trigger an emotional response in the vast majority of humanity, of potential readers. And so if you're not plotting and you're not putting those things in your story, you're not going to hit those same emotional key points. So readers won't really understand why this story isn't working. They may feel like it just doesn't capture their attention, or it doesn't, there's just like something wrong with it. They get lost in the middle, it stops holding their interest, and they quit the book. They won't know why, but you're the author, you have to control that experience. So if you're a pantser, and I'm not sure if you know, pantsers are people who write by the seat of their pants, and plotters are people who map out the book and plot. There are benefits to both, but if you are a pantser, even if you're a great writer, you may not be able to hold their attention, or you might have a really good book, but it still could have more emotional impact if you had built plotting into it. And it doesn't have to be, when I talk about plotting, a lot of authors freak out because they see like the hero's journey with its 60 pieces, or there's huge outlines for writing chapters, and that feels too controlling, and they don't want to map all that out. The program that has worked for me, I've studied a lot of fiction and a lot of books on plotting, and I kind of boiled it down to a smaller, simpler process that I use from my own fiction that works really well. I'm going to walk you through my process for plotting books that sell. It's based on the hero's journey. A lot of people say not every book has a hero's journey in it, and that's totally true. But if you're writing commercial fiction that sells, the majority are going to, if not have a hero's journey, they're still going to be based on a protagonist who goes through challenges and grows and then reaches a point where they defeat the challenges that have been not only limiting them but also pushing them to grow. That's I've seen people say, oh, don't worry about plotting, don't worry about the hero's journey, it's all about character development. That's true, but if you can use the hero's journey to structure that character development, it'll end up with a stronger novel that'll resonate more with readers. So on the one hand, it'll produce, whether you're a pantser or a plotter, it will produce a better quality, more emotionally satisfying novel that readers will appreciate. Even if they don't recognize what you're doing, when they finish the novel, it'll stick with them it'll have more of an emotional impact on them. There's more likely a chance that they'll review it or share it with their friends, which is why plotting is really important. But also, if you're not, especially if you're working on your first book and you can't seem to get through the first book. I had trouble for like 10 years. I could never finish a book. I had lots of scenes and drawers full of material, but I couldn't get all the way through it until I really focused on plotting well and outlining my story before I started. So if you're working on a book, or maybe you've written books but they're not successful, or you've never been successful at finishing a book, plotting is really a great way to shorten your writing time and help you to get through the book. A lot of times authors quit because they get to the middle and they don't know what happens next. If you don't know what happens next in your story, you know, people say authors are kind of hard on themselves because they sit down and they say, I just can't write. I sit down and the words don't flow. That's usually an indication that you don't know what happens next in the story, or maybe that your story is broken and that you feel like you think you have an idea of where this story goes, but you also recognize that there's something missing, or writing in that direction is just going to lead to another roadblock. Whereas if you plot it out and you know what happens next, of course this is always open to change. When you go through the first draft, you'll always be revising and adding new content in, that's fine. But it does help to have the end goal in mind and a process that you're going through. So this short video series, this is a book I put out a while ago called The Plot Dot. And in that book, I have a little map of my process, which only has 9 steps. So it's a hero's journey, kind of, although there are some differences. I had trouble, especially towards the end of the book, with the second plot point and the final battle. I couldn't make things kind of tie up and wrap in very well. So my version of the hero story is a little different from the classical version. It works really well for me. I've seen different interpretations of the hero's journey, and so I don't think mine is innovative. I just think I've clarified some of the things that other people don't clarify. So it's simpler and easier for me to plot my novel. I'll start with those 9 points and make sure I have them in roughly the right places. As long as I have those scenes mapped out, I can kind of write to fill in the gaps between those scenes. Like, how do I get from this first point to the next point? What has to happen between those points for it to make sense? And then I also have a bigger chapter outline that I use when I first start mapping out a book, and I'll link down below so that you can grab that template. You don't have to follow it exactly, but starting with those training wheels or that structure can help you to just map out your book faster. So you can grab, I think I'll put up a PDF copy of the plot dot, and also a Word copy of this chapter outline that I use for formatting my own books. I'll put links down below so you can grab those if they're useful for you. And then in this video series, I'm just going to be talking about each of those 9 plot points in case you're new to plotting and you're thinking about plotting your book. And I'll be describing those in more detail. So you can just go through this video series and learn a little bit about each of the plot points, grab the free materials, and I think that'll really help you to not only finish a novel, but finish a novel that's going to really resonate with readers and sell more copies with less work and less marketing. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.